Now, you mentioned that the Chinese program that they're looking to create. What was it? How many hidden champions?
1,000. They want to create 1,000 hidden champions with a new program, which was decided in Beijing in early February. Mm-hmm. And my contact in the place where the Hermann Simon Business School was inaugurated last week said it arrived 3 weeks later with concrete implementation measures on the local level.
Right.
So that speed, decision by the center, 3 weeks later it's on the local level with concrete implementation actions.
If you look at Chinese government programs from the past, right? Like 20 years ago, they launched a variety of programs to become global market leader in various industries. Has that been successful? And is the Chinese system of centralized, controlled economics actually superior to a Western system of free capitalism?
Of course not. I mean, we believe in our free system of capitalism where the innovations, the progress comes from the individuals, from the companies, and not from a central authority. And we have seen practically in all countries where you had the centralized system that big mistakes are made. The Nobel Prize winner von Hayek said, in all systems, mistakes and errors occur. The difference between a centralized system is that errors have huge negative consequences. Whereas in a decentralized system, many errors are made, but they have only small consequences. Of course, the system has, in some aspects, advantages. Think of the railroad system. If you want to build a national railroad network, it's very difficult. It's almost impossible to do that in a country like Germany. And I mean, Japan is even a little better. They built the linear Shinkansen. Whereas in a centralized system, it's being dictated. And I compare that to the situation in Germany, 1870. Look at Cologne. They built the main station right beside the famous Cathedral of Cologne, because the Prussian emperor, the German emperor, said the main station of Cologne will be just there, and that was the decision. So in certain stages of development, it has advantages, whereas India is impossible to build this infrastructure, which it would equally need like China. So there are some advantages, but overall, I believe, of course, in that free capitalism and freedom will prevail, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear members, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to our today's online Executive Insight session. Thank you very much for your interest and for joining. Ladies and gentlemen, the term hidden champion has become part of our daily vocabulary in business. All of us know that globalization is one of the key criteria that makes a hidden champion. In our today's session, the speaker will share his most recent thoughts and findings about how the rules of globalization are changing and impacting our business and that of hidden champions. I'm very glad and very thankful that Professor Hermann Simon, the founder of and honorary chairman of Simon Kucher & Partners, has agreed to join us today and share his latest thoughts on this day. Hermann, a very warm welcome and greetings to Germany, and thank you very much for being with us today. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Markus, for the friendly introduction. And this is also in German the title of my new book, Hidden Champions, die neuen Spielregeln im chinesischen Jahrhundert, the new game in the Chinese century. And we will hopefully have a Japanese version as well, probably next year. It always takes some time for the translation. Let me start with a view at the globalization in terms of exports over 10 years, so a long-term perspective. And here you see that China is the clear number one. That's amazing because for the first time on an annual base, China became number one in 2009 when the West was stagnating and China continued to grow. In the second place, the US, and a close up is Germany, and all the other countries, including Japan, are somewhat behind. Interesting is also the perspective of the per capita exports, again, for the same 10-year period. Here, Germany is the clear number one, ahead of Korea and also the other European countries. And that's amazing because from a geostrategic location perspective, Germany, France, Italy are similar. They have the same distance to the large markets, but the German per capita exports are about twice as large as those of the other countries. Now, what is the reason for this extreme export performance of Germany? And spontaneous thought is this must be due to the large companies, the large exporters. Here I show you on the horizontal axis the Fortune Global 500 companies, so the largest companies in the world. And on the vertical axis, the exports here for the year 2019. And you see that for most countries, indeed, there is an almost linear correlation between the number of large companies and the export performance. That applies to the US, Japan, Korea, United Kingdom, etc. There are only two exceptions, China and Germany. And as we just saw, China is the number one in absolute exports, Germany is the number one in per capita exports. So what is the difference? The difference lies in the role of mid-sized companies as exporters. In China, 68% of the huge exports come from mid-sized companies, and in Germany, the percentage is similar. Now, of course, not every mid-sized and small company is an exporter. The stars are the so-called hidden champions. This slide tells us, yes, you need large companies for a strong export performance, but in addition to that, you need a strong mid-sized sectors to be really excellent. And this leads us to the hidden champions. What is a hidden champion? A company which belongs to the top 3 in the world in its market, has a revenue of less than $5 billion and is not known, what I call hidden in the public. Revenue less than $5 billion, that may sound rather large to you. Is that a mid-sized company? Yes, in the global age, this is not large, but medium-sized. The Fortune Global 500 have an average revenue of 64 billion. And the smallest of them still makes 25 billion. So we talk here of a new category of Mittelstands, of mid-sized companies with several hundred million, 1 billion, 2 billion in revenue. And if we look at the countries, I have here on the left scale the number of hidden champions, and on the right scale the hidden champions per million inhabitants. You see that Germany has by far the largest number. Japan has also a substantial number with 283, but on a per capita base, measured in per million population, you see that the hidden champions seem to be a unique phenomenon of German-speaking countries. Germany, Austria, Switzerland all have around 19, and all other countries have a much lower per capita number. The Scandinavian countries come closest. For instance, Finland has 5, but all the large countries have only a very small number in per capita terms of these mid-sized global market leaders. Now, what is changing in globalization? If we look back at the last 30 years, we have 2 distinct periods. From 1990 to 2010, we had a period of hyper-globalization, meaning that global exports grew more than global gross-domestic product. And since 2010, we experience a relative deglobalization. Global exports grow less than global gross-domestic product. And we see that here. On the vertical axis, I have the so-called trade elasticity, the growth rate of exports divided by the growth rates of global GDP. You see, for the period from 90 to 99, exports grew more than double than GDP. Even from 2000 to 2009, the growth rate was about 1.5 times higher, the growth rate of exports. And since 2010, it's very close to 1, and since 2014, it's below 1. So this clearly shows us that the deceleration of global exports was not induced by Donald Trump, but started before as a consequence, among others, of the financial crisis in 2008-2010. I call this relative deglobalization because exports make up a smaller part of global GDP than in the period of hyperglobalization. Now, what is the new game in globalization? Relative deglobalization is likely to continue. We have the tensions between the US and China. We will see that it's getting more difficult to trade between the various power blocks. Goods exports will be substituted by foreign direct investments. Then we experience a dematerialization of international exchange. Service exports are growing consistently and more strongly than the GDP. So we have a different, we still have a kind of hyperglobalization in service exports. Digitalization contributes, of course, to the dematerialization, and new technologies like remote 3D printing, where you may have the data in Japan and the product is printed out in Germany for the target markets there. Then I am not presenting now physically in Tokyo, which I would love to do. Physical travel will be partially replaced by Zoom. We have to see how much, but I've often gone to Asia for a speech of 30 minutes, and I think that will be partially replaced by Zoom and similar software. Then a big challenge is finding the best location for each activity. For instance, for artificial intelligence, it seems that China is the best country. For instance, Velo, a leading hidden champion in high-tech pumps, established its competence center for digital intelligence, especially in marketing and sales, in China. Because more data are available and the data protection is less rigid than in Germany. Then a step further, we see some companies, also hidden champions, establishing 3 regional headquarters in Asia, in US, and Europe. Velo is an example, and Simon Kucher is also an example. We have 3 legally independent companies in Germany, in the US, and in Asia. The shareholders are the same, but these are not subsidiaries, Tochtergesellschaften, but legally independent companies. The idea behind that is that if we experience more separations between the blocks, we can operate as a local company and not as a subsidiary of a foreign company. Here I have a picture of the global service exports. You see more or less continuous growth. And the dotted line shows the percentage of the GDP, which means it's increasing. Growth of service exports is larger than growth of global GDP. A short look at the population dynamics. Here we compare 2020 with 2050. And you all know that Africa is exploding. The population will practically double. Asia Pacific also grows quite strongly. India, and then China, Europe, Germany, Russia, Japan are actually shrinking. Japan is shrinking most among these large countries. Now this is rather well known. When we look at the economics, and here I use a horizon of 10 years because it's impossible to predict the economic situation until 2050, we see a very different picture, different relative to the population dynamics. The world is split into 3 parts. The first global league, the US still the number 1, China and the European Union, 27 without the UK. And the second global league is relatively far apart from this first block. And here you see also that Africa still is very small in economic terms. Today, Africa accounts for 3% of the global economic output, and in 10 years it will only be 3.3%. This means that we have this explosion of the population, but the economic growth is lagging behind that. And what is also quite disappointing is India, Brazil, Russia, BRIC states. In spite of rather high growth rates, they will not make up a large part of the global economic output because the starting base is too low. A low growth rate with a high growth rate with a low starting base does not change your position radically. So what does this mean for a hidden champion who wants to acquire and keep a strong global market position? You must be strong in the first global league. The first global league accounts for 60% of the gross domestic product of the world in 2030. Now let's go to the business level, and here I have what I call the hidden champions wheel of success. The core is the ambition to be the best. How do they achieve that? By focus, innovation, and then globalization. And 2 new factors which encompass each aspect of the strategy are digitalization and ecosystems. And I will go into details on all these aspects. The ambition to be the best. The chairman of Stihl, the global leader in chainsaws, said recently, either we are the best or we don't do it. The best or we don't do it. Mackevision, global leader in computer-generated imagery, says, our ambition is to be the absolute number 1 for computer-generated imagery worldwide. The absolute number 1. DeepL, the best translation machine in the world, we deliver the best translations in the world. There it starts with the ambition to be the best in your market worldwide. You only achieve that through focus. Only focus leads to world class. Again, a few examples. TeamViewer, global market leader in screen sharing. We focus on online collaboration and remote support worldwide. Nemetschek, global leader in software for architects and engineers in the building sector. Focus on one thing and be the world's best at it. And Flexi, classical hidden champion, world market leader in retractable dog leashes. We only focus on one thing, but we do it better than anyone else. They only make one product and have 70% global market share. Focus makes the market small. If you sell dog leashes only in Germany, that's a very small market. How do you make it big? By globalization. And here I show you the globalization history of Kärcher, the global leader in high-pressure water cleaners. They started in the mid-70s, and ever since then they have added 1, 2, 3 countries each year to their global network. And I recently talked to the CEO, he's 52 years old, and he said, I want to be in all United Nations countries during my tenure. So he has to open 100 more subsidiaries in the next 10 years or so. This is the world map of world. They are all a little bit larger and more advanced in their globalization. And you see virtually only Africa is missing. And if you look at this map in 10 years from now, it will probably be all red. Now, what are the driving forces and new rules of the game there? Innovation, of course, digitalization, business ecosystems, and the most recent one, sustainability. On innovation, hidden champions spend double the industry average on research and development and have 5 times more patents than the average company on a per employee base. And I show you now a few breakthrough innovations from hidden champions. You have certainly heard of the Volocopter, the first electric helicopter, and they got last year the order from Singapore and from Dubai to establish an autonomous air taxi system, which will probably operate in 2 to 3 years from now. Let's stay in the aerospace world. That was the CEO of Lilium, a vertically take-off and horizontally flying electric plane. And they're just about to go public in New York at the Nasdaq and expect a valuation of 3.5 billion. Experts are still discussing whether that works. Their plan is to have a plane which can carry 7 passengers. And there's a big dispute among experts, so we have to see whether it really works. Now, why do I show you a regional train? Nothing is more boring than a regional train. This is the first hydrogen-powered train in the world, and it runs now daily between various towns in northern Germany. The first hydrogen-powered train. This is a demonstration project, a technical masterpiece from Festo. Festo is the global leader in pneumatics, an essential element of automation. And whenever I visit a factory anywhere in the world, I ask whether they have Festo components in their plant, and the answer is always 100% Festo. This is another demonstration. This is a real product, the flexible gripper, an application of pneumatics. You see that is very valuable for automation purposes. It can grip any shape. Now, digitalization. Hidden champions are mostly in B2B, not B2C. B2C is an American and Chinese game, and German companies are not going to play a role in that market. And an interesting illustration is Uber. Uber tested its system for several years in San Francisco and then rolled it out into many American cities. If you do the same from Germany, you have to overcome 27 languages in Europe, bureaucracies, etc. So it's very unlikely that we establish a leading position in consumer digitalization. Another difference is that industrial processes are highly complex, much more complex than consumer processes, and that is the homeland of the hidden champions, complexity. And let me give you some examples. I already mentioned TeamViewer, remote screen sharing. They are on more than 2.5 billion devices. And you have probably not heard of LSTM, which stands for long short-term memory. That is the software behind the Siri of Apple or Alexa of Amazon. LSTM is installed on more than 3 billion smartphones from Germany, Switzerland, invented by Professor Schmidhuber from the Technical University of Munich. DeepL, I mentioned, in many tests, turned out to be the best translation system. And if you do not use it yet, I can really recommend it. I use it every day. Autonomous driving, one of the most modern areas. In the last 10 years, 40% of all patents come from Germany. And to take a small hidden champion, MK Technology, at Elon Musk's rocket space company, SpaceX, 6 MK systems for so-called investment casting replace 1,000 large 3D printers. In order to make these complex parts for the Mars rockets, Elon Musk would need 1,000 3D printers, and he can now make it with 6 MK systems. A quote from the Apple CEO Tim Cook: German hidden champions play in the very top league. Up there, the air is very thin. Now listen, we have 767 suppliers in Germany. 767. So in every Apple product, it's full of German components. Business ecosystems, that's a very recent development, increasingly important. And let me illustrate that here for extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV. The customers are foundries and so-called integrated device manufacturers from Taiwan and everywhere. And the maker of the end product is ASML, a Dutch hidden champion. And the two most important partners in this ecosystem are Trumpf with the lasers and Zeiss with the optics. The Trumpf laser has 450,000 parts and weighs 17 tons. And the size system is equally complex. What these three companies achieve together in terms of mastering complexity could not be achieved by one company. So we see more and more with increasing complexity that these ecosystems become increasingly important. And here we have the ecosystem of MK Technology, which I just mentioned, complex investment casting systems. They have partners from China for rapid prototyping, fast casting. Voxeljet makes the largest 3D printers in Germany, from Russia, from France. Again, a small company can make extremely complex product because it has this network or ecosystem of partners who contribute to mastering the complexity. The last new driving force, sustainability. Some people say sustainability is a new digital, and I tend to agree. And the hidden champions are leading in sustainable technologies. And Germany has a competitive advantage, or could say Europe, probably Japan also, because we have the most rigid regulations on the environment, more rigid than in the US or China, and that forces us to develop new solutions. Last point, employees and leaders. Employees are highly qualified and motivated. We have a culture of top performance in the Hidden Champions and an extremely high loyalty. The annual turnover is only 2.7%. In Germany, it's 7.3%. And then strong leaders with a very long tenure. The average tenure is a little over 20 years. In large corporations is just 6 years for the CEOs. Short comparison between German, Chinese, and Japanese hidden champions. Where do they stand? The German, as we have seen, have a very high global presence. China still very low. Japanese, medium. Global brands, German strong, only in their target groups, of course, not in the general public. China very weak, Japanese medium. And one problem of some Japanese hidden champions is that they sell more through the large companies where they are suppliers or through trading houses, and do not establish the same local presence as the Germans. Growth rates, Germans medium, gradual, but continuous growth. Similar to for the Japanese, Chinese high. And then a big difference, IPO, the Chinese go very early public, collect huge amounts of monies and invest that into R&D. They have many more R&D employees. My guess is that for comparable size in terms of revenue, total number of employees, the Japanese have 4 to 5 times more research and development employees. And an interesting, the Chinese, an interesting story here is I visited Nokia in 2005 in Helsinki, where they were a dominant force in the mobile phone market. And actually they were quite arrogant. And they told me at that time, we have 19,000 people in research and development. Nobody can match us. 3 years later, I attended a speech of the CEO of Huawei at the Asia Pacific Conference in New Delhi, and he said we have 50,000 research and development employees. So you know what has become out of this? This is really a dangerous development for the German and maybe also for the Japanese hidden champions. My last aspect, where Germany and Japan have one commonality, which is not good, the profit margins. This is a comparison for OECD countries over a period of 8 years, and I just published a book in German. Am Gewinn ist noch keine Firma kaputt gegangen, and the English title will be True Profit. No company ever broke from turning a profit. And you see here that Germany and Japan are the lowest in profitability. a very bad situation. And here we see that there is a somewhat negative correlation between the size of an economy and the net profit margin. How can that be? Normally we would expect that in large markets you profit from economies of scale, but there's another force, that's competition. And in large markets, the competition puts a pressure on profitability, and this force seems to be stronger than the economies of scale effect. If we look at the profits of companies, we find very few. Toyota Motor is just in this table. No German company, but many American and also quite a few Chinese companies. And the development with regard to profit is actually dramatic. In a recent study of 6,000 companies which make more than 1 billion in revenue, the best 10% of the superstars harvest 80% of the global economic profit. Economic profit is a profit above the cost of capital, the so-called weighted average cost of capital. So the real entrepreneurial profit, you could say. And the best 1% harvest 36% of the global economic profit. These are the Apples, the Facebooks, and some banks, actually, American banks are very profitable. And no Japanese, no German company is among those. On the other hand, the worst 10% annihilate as much value as the best 10% generate. And there, in this group, we find quite a few Germans like ThyssenKrupp and also a couple of Japanese. And the gap between superstars and losers is increasing. This means, of course, the profitability is reflected in the market capitalization. And if you look at the capitalization, for instance, of Apple, it's bigger than that of all DAX 30 companies combined. A very dangerous situation. Let me summarize. Hidden champions play a key role for global business success. Exports will be substituted by foreign direct investments, not totally, but to a substantial degree. Finding the best location in the world for each activity is mandatory. New organizational forms are developing, for instance, 3 regional headquarters, legally independent, competence centers. This is a new organization that will emerge on the global scale. The global game will be determined in the leading countries, not in the third world, not in Africa, as sad as that may sound. Ambition to be the best is the foundation for hidden championship. Only focus leads to world class. Competition is increasingly between business ecosystems, not only between and among single companies. Sustainability can well become the next digital, and German and Japanese companies have a very serious problem with profits and behind that market capitalization. So these are the new books. My last slide. Many Worlds, One Life is my autobiography. It will also appear in Japanese in January. True Profit I mentioned. That's the first profit book, pure profit book actually in the world. And in Germany we will have in 2 months as Hidden Champions die neuen Spielregeln im chinesischen Jahrhundert. Many thanks for your attention and I look forward to Q&A. Karl-Hane, you have the floor.
Yeah, Hermann, thank you so much for this very, very interesting presentation. The topics of Hidden Champion translated to Chinese. Can we maybe go back to the slide on Chinese versus German Hidden Champions?
Yeah.
And then maybe you can come give us a few examples on companies and that in how they fit the generalizations that yeah, you've come up there. Yeah, that's slide 32. We had some, you listed a few...
oh, yeah,
chapters.
no, I made a mistake. Let me go back again. Yeah. Let me, for instance, give an example. A company like Trumpf, which is already very R&D intensive, they have about 2,000 employees in R&D.
Right.
Compare that to Hikvision, the global leader in surveillance cameras, they have 9,000. Or if you look at the global presence, the company Hillebrand, which is the global leader in logistics for alcoholic beverage, they have their own subsidiaries in 62 countries. And Lens, which is in the optical area in China, they have subsidiaries in 4 countries. Mm-hmm. So they are these are just 2 examples where I compare Chinese. There's a much deeper comparison with many examples in the new Hidden Champions book, which is only available in Germany in a few months, but also in Japanese in early next year, I would say.
Okay. You say that sustainability has become the new digital. Now, in Germany, sustainability is sort of the Green Party is so powerful that sustainability is a mainstream topic that unless you are sustainable, you are not going to sell anything to anybody because it's such a mainstream topic. But in turn, it leads to a lot of hidden champions that are based on that. Now, you mentioned that the Chinese program that they're looking to create, what was it? How many hidden champions?
1,000. They want to create 1,000 hidden champions with a new program which was decided in Beijing in early February. Mm-hmm. And my contact in the place where the Hermann Simon Business School was inaugurated last week said it arrived 3 weeks later with concrete implementation measures on the local level.
Right.
So that speed, decision by the center, 3 weeks later it's on the local level with concrete implementation actions.
If you look at Chinese government programs from the past, right? Like 20 years ago, they launched a variety of programs to become global market leader in various industries. Has that been successful? And is the Chinese system of centralized, controlled economics actually superior to a Western system of free capitalism?
Of course not. I mean, we believe in our free system of capitalism where the innovations, the progress comes from the individuals, from the companies, and not from a central authority. And we have seen practically in all countries where you had the centralized system that big mistakes are made. The Nobel Prize winner von Hayek said, in all systems, mistakes and errors occur. The difference between a centralized system is that errors have huge negative consequences. Whereas in a decentralized system, many errors are made, but they have only small consequences. Mm. Of course, the system has, in some aspects, advantages. Think of the railroad system. If you want to build a national railroad network, it's very difficult. It's almost impossible to do that in a country like Germany. And I mean, Japan is even a little better. They built the linear Shinkansen. Whereas in a centralized system, it's being dictated. And I compare that to the situation in Germany, 1870. Look at Cologne. They built the main station right beside the famous Cathedral of Cologne because the Prussian emperor, the German emperor, said the main station of Cologne will be just there, and that was the decision. So in certain stages of development, it has advantages, whereas India is impossible to build this infrastructure, which it would equally need like China. So there are some advantages, but overall, I believe, of course, in that free capitalism and freedom will prevail, of course.
I'm 100% with you.
By the way, on sustainability, Yes, that is the message of the Greens, but all the other parties are emphasizing this now as well. But the real innovations come again from the companies. Here, this is a white shirt. Normally, such a shirt is made from cotton, but you can now buy shirts at Zara and similar retailers which are made from wooden fibers.
Right.
And just to compare a few things, a cotton shirt consumes 2,700 liters of water and needs 6 square meters. A shirt made from wooden fibers, where the global market leader is the hidden champion Lenzing from Austria, consumes 180 liters of water, less than 1/10, and needs 60.6 square meters, 1/10 of the surface. So this is just one small, I give a dozen of these breakthrough innovations. For instance, there's one company, Kraftforce in Berlin. They produce hydrogen from waste, and the costs are about 1/3 of the current cost of producing hydrogen. It's not yet on an industrial scale. It's still a laboratory, but it's a method which may lead to different use of waste at a cost which is 1/3 of the current cost. And we have dozens of these innovations which are in a very early stage, and of course have to prove themselves. Some will fail, but some will be successful.
Yes, sustainability being a mainstream issue, certainly. You mentioned, you showed a very nice list of profitable companies before, and we were just discussing the Chinese versus the American system, if we're talking about centralized versus decentralized systems. There is the absence of Japanese companies on that list. And my theory really is that Japan is actually a socialist country, that where the objective of companies, especially in a shrinking market environment now with a shrinking population, is not profitability so much anymore as it is market share and survival.
Yeah.
But that our system actually, as our companies are not that profitable, but we also have kind of a full employment in our economy, and we have social peace in our economy, which the Chinese achieve via force, but the Americans don't have the force and they have no social peace. Lots of freedom, but no social peace. So I believe our system really operates in the middle between the two. That's why we don't have the profitable companies, but that's why we have a much nicer life here in Japan.
That's a point, and that is certainly a commonality between Japan and Germany. Why are both of them rather low on this scale? And I can confirm from an experience which lies 15 or 20 years back. We had a meeting at Sony and about pricing. Pricing is the competence of Simon Kucher & Partners, my consulting company. And their profit has been lousy. They made losses for many years until the current CEO took over in 2016 or so. So I said, you must charge a brand premium. Everybody knows Sony, but people are not really willing. I had just bought a camera at that time, which was new on the market and sold at a 35% discount. And then the global head of marketing of Sony said, it was in Tokyo, but then we lose market share. So it was the end of the discussion. And even I didn't contradict because I knew a taboo was touched. Yeah. Conceding market share to get higher profit was traditionally unthinkable for the Japanese company. And in Germany, I think keeping employment. I have been on a couple of boards, and in one company, they reported, the management team reported, we just got a new order many years ago from France for 20 million. And I said, relative to your offer, what was the realized price? And they said we had to concede 17%. They said, what was your calculated margin for the original offer? They said 14%. So they came out with a loss of 3%, but were very proud that they had secured the employment of their people for the next few months. And the danger is, as I shortly mentioned, in the global market, the purchasing power of a company is determined by the market capitalization. And we can say Apple can buy any company, even large ones, out of the Portokasse, out of their wallet. And we see it. Just to give you an example, I talked last week to the CEO of the high-tech Founders Fund in Germany. And he said, we are quite successful in helping startups. And then after a few years, if they flourish, the founders want to sell them. Mm. And who buys them? American or Chinese. And they pay prices which no German can afford. So he said, we are cultivating young companies like young football players to sell them to America like the young football players are sold to Real Madrid. And I don't think that this is a sustainable situation for a national economy if purchasing power from outside picks the best companies, the best startups, and very often the Americans especially, they offer then the founders to move to America, they pay them high bonuses, etc. And then they even leave the country and we supply Americans with some of our best talents.
Yeah, I think that has been a problem. It has always been a problem with innovative technologies, particularly in Germany. If you look at the history of some
MP3, think of
exactly,
MP3.
Exactly, yeah. That's exactly the example I was going to come up with. Yes, look, let's shift a little bit towards COVID. Is there something that Hidden Champions have done differently during COVID that gave them an edge? And if not, that's also okay.
Of course, also many hidden champions are in trouble during the crisis. And I draw a parallel to the crisis of 2008. And there are two, you could say, defining characteristics of typical hidden champions products. The first is they are postponable. Normally, you don't have to buy a machine like a pharmaceutical today. You can postpone the purchase or a car half a year, but eventually you have to buy it. And the second characteristic, they are indispensable. We had a discussion then with the CEO of Trumpf, global leader in laser machines. And we draw a comparison between a typical Japanese exporter and a typical German exporter. And for the typical Japanese, we took Toyota. And Trumpf for the typical German. And then the question was, if all products of these companies disappeared off today, what would happen? If all Toyotas disappeared, as not much would happen because there's enough reserve capacity in the automotive industry to produce the cars. They would buy Nissans, Opels, or whatever. If all Trumpf machines disappeared as of today, the global manufacturing industry would collapse.
Okay.
The same is true for Festo. Okay. If all the components of Festo would disappear, we would have a very serious problem with the global manufacturing capacity. So postponable, which doesn't protect them against the crisis, because if people can order later, they will do that if they don't have the money or the sales. And on the other hand, indispensable after a certain period, they have to order new replacement parts, etc. Right. And this also explained in 2010 why the Hidden Champions recovered quite quickly, and the same seems to be happening now.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Carl, if I may just Carl, we have a couple of questions from our audience.
We have a question from Gerd Telbischer, which please go ahead and why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me? My name is Gerd Telbischer. I'm from...
Yeah, Gerd, I hear you.
Okay. You mentioned globalization as a critical factor for hidden champions. And I'm working 20 years in Japan, and I see exactly there a big problem for Japanese companies who might have the potential, but they are really struggling with as simple things from language, their rigid company culture, to really go outside Japan and develop the market. And there I could mention other reasons. My question to you, from where you see should come the push that the Japanese companies come over this hurdle, from the companies itself, from the government, what would be your recommendation to help the Japanese potential hidden champion to really become global?
I think the push has to come from within the companies, and maybe the young generation. I, for instance, recommend to all owners of mid-sized companies, send your children abroad that they get familiar with the global world. They will live in the global world. Of course, the government can help a little, but by exchange programs for students. The interesting thing with the German hidden champions, especially if I look into the period immediately after the Second World War, many of the founders of hidden champions did not have an academic education, did not speak foreign languages, but they still had the courage just to go abroad. And I observe that more today with the Chinese who don't speak English well, don't speak English better than the Japanese, but they simply have the courage to establish a company in Germany or somewhere else. So I think I fully agree that many Japanese do not exploit their global potential because they are not there. It's mostly a cultural problem, I think.
Okay, we have a next question from Udo Leiber. Udo?
Udo, turn on your microphone. Unmute. He's still muted. Now it's, yeah.
Yes, Udo, we can hear you now.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, well.
Okay. Yes, very interesting today to listen to your speech. My question is, how do you see the competition between Chinese and German hidden champion in future?
I touched this shortly by speaking on the research and development, the higher capacity in capital, etc. And I see the Chinese hidden champions as the toughest future competitors. And my conclusion from this is that Germans must become Chinese. I mentioned Vilo, they established their competence center for artificial intelligence in China. We have several companies who produce mining technology like Schenk in Darmstadt for measuring systems, and others. They have established their competence centers in China for mining because there's no more coal mining in Germany. And that's the point. Everything you can do best in one location, you have to do it. A very interesting article in the current issue of the Harvard Business Review. They say the Chinese consumer is the most innovative. They adopt innovations much more quickly than consumers in Japan or Europe. And then where you test new technology, I mean, digital payments are a classic example. You best test it or introduce it first in China. You will learn most from how to overcome resistance on the consumer side, rather than in Germany, where consumers simply don't accept new technologies or data protection prevents it or whatever. So Udo, clear answer, the Chinese will be our strongest competitors, and in order to neutralize that, German hidden champions have to establish their own strong presence in China, including R&D, to compete under the same conditions. The same applies, by the way, for Japanese and for Chinese. The Chinese are also doing that. All Chinese car manufacturers have a design center in Germany, especially the premium car manufacturers. They're all in Munich or Stuttgart.
Another question from the audience from Hiroki Wisoi. A lot of German hidden champions are in family ownership. Do you believe that this factor, family ownership, has a positive impact on German hidden champions?
Clearly, yes, especially with regard to long-term orientation. So they are not driven by quarterly necessities to report, etc. On the other hand, it also limits, again, a weakness relative to the Chinese, the capital formation, because they mostly do self-financing from their own cash flow. And if other companies go public, collect huge amounts of money, that can lead to a difficult situation.
Right. Okay. Here's a good one. What happens when a hidden champion becomes higher profile and is no longer hidden? Does it expose them to higher competition or a takeover threat? Because, for example, a good example, I believe, would be Kircher. Because of their B2C line like Wirt, right? Wirt is B2B and nobody knows Wirt unless you're in the industry somehow. B2B and B2C, so.
Yeah. If you, companies which is a minority of about little less than 20%, which are in B2C hidden champions, of course, they become eventually visible, are no longer truly hidden. And then the probability that they will get an offer from a big consumer guy gets really high. The most recent example is Birkenstock, the health sandals. They were taken over by Arnault from Louis Vuitton, where NSC, and I think they paid $3 billion for that. So they also took over a manufacturer of suitcases, Rimowa, 2 years ago. So if these companies with high visibility and then an increasingly stronger brand name come in on the radar screen of large consumer goods companies, the owners may not withstand the temptation to cash in. So I'm always sorry if that happens, because very often these companies, these hidden champions, lose their identity. Just a recent example, a company which is very competent in automation, very specialized automation systems, Kroman Engineering. Elon Musk detected them a few years ago, and he needed this technology for his mega factory for batteries in Nevada. So he simply took them over in 2017, that was. And just a few months ago, he kicked the name of the founder out, so it's no longer Kroman Engineering, it's Tesla Automation today. And I'm always sad when I see such a company simply disappearing in a large corporation.
Yeah, but I believe that happens with quite a bit of innovation, that big companies goggle it up and then utilize it only for their own purpose, and it can't be used for good.
Yeah, we have had since 2014 300 acquisitions of German mid-sized companies by Chinese alone. And I think I don't have a similar statistic for American acquisitions, but American ownership of hidden champions and mid-sized companies is still much stronger than of Chinese acquirers.
Right. Okay, I think we've come to a good ending here. Hermann, again, thank you so much. It was a very short while, kurzweilig. That's not short while, that's a bad translation of a good German word.
That's how we occasionally translate the things. That leads to new words in the English language.
Thank you very much. And hopefully next time we can again greet you here in person and join afterwards maybe for some sushi. So if I could hand the event back to you. And
thank you, Karl. Thank you, Markus. I very much enjoyed being at least mentally in Tokyo for an hour. And I look forward to seeing you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Arigato, domo gozaimashita.
To thank you also from the side of the chamber and also to all the participants joining and listening to your encouraging